Hi, Becky. Welcome to the Bracken Outdoors podcast.
Hello, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, hoping to have quite a good discussion on flow and how to encourage it and what it all means, particularly in a forest school and kind of outdoor context. But before we get into that, would you be able to let people know kind of how you ended up where you are now? I know a lot of people have a more of a twisted path and with lots of interesting shortcuts and twists and turns along the way. So how did you come to be talking about flow?
Of course. I encountered flow really through my forest school training. But before that, I was a classroom teacher, bog standard classroom teacher. I taught various year groups across the primary sector, and I started that in 2005. So it's a long time ago now. And after I had children, I took a step back a little bit from teaching. I went back into the classroom because I missed it so much when my daughter was very small, just as a classroom assistant. I shouldn't say just because they're not just classroom assistants at all.
Sure.
They're amazing. We couldn't do the job without them. Um, and that's where I had the opportunity to do my forest school training, which was just an eye opener for me. Just opened up a whole new way of learning. And actually, what I found was that all children, neurodiverse and neurotypical, benefit so much from forest school with very little changes needed. It's already there for them. So it's just fantastic.
Yeah, that's what I came across as well. That was kind of what drove me out of teaching halfway through, three-quarters of the way through my teaching degree, was spending that time outdoors and go, actually, you know what, this is the way children naturally learn. This very much experiential, child-led, everything that all of the research said was a good idea and good to have. And then I went into schools on placement and none of it was happening in practice. And
Yeah.
there's that kind of big gap between theory and practice I see in education because in some ways we're still rooted back in educational practice that was those 40 years old, if not more.
You're absolutely right. I think, it was originally designed for the Industrial Revolution and to get people ready for that for the future. And of course, society has changed so much since then, that, yeah, we're still trying to fit children into a mold that really isn't working anymore. And, it's not the fault of teachers, it's the fault of the whole system, really. It just isn't designed for our modern day pupils.
No, no, I totally agree. And I've been a very vocal advocate for change, both within and without outside of the school system. But so getting on to our main topic, what is flow and where does that kind of fit in with the idea that there's ways that children learn better than maybe they do in most schools?
So, flow is a concept that was coined by a psychologist. Now, let me get his name right. It's quite difficult to pronounce. It's Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's right. Csikszentmihalyi. And he, his idea of flow was that it's that state that we get ourselves into, where we're just time disappears and we're so involved in what we're doing that we don't even realize it, but we're learning and we're making those neuro connections in our brains. Um, so we all enter different states of flow at different times because it's all to do. The beauty of flow is that it's to do with our own passions and interests and what interests us. So Forest School does this beautifully because it's child led and it gives children the autonomy to choose their own learning paths and journeys. It gives them clear purpose. And by that, I mean, it sort of gives them real life experiences. A lot of the experiences that they encounter in the classroom are quite manufactured. If you think about some of the maths problems that they encounter. So
Yeah,
so and
who's
so's got
buying
so many.
20 pineapples?
Yeah, exactly. And so's got so many oranges. They don't care how many oranges that person's got. Whereas if they see a ladybird and they're interested in it, they might be interested to know how many legs it has. And so it just gives real purpose to that learning and a real clear understanding of it. You also get immediate feedback as well from that environment. So in a classroom, it's manufactured in that you have to wait for the teacher to tell you whether that answer is correct, or you might even have to wait the next day until the piece of work has been marked. Whereas in the forest school environment, you actually get that feedback straight away. The thing that they've been trying to do, has it actually worked? Have they got out of it what they need to get out of it? And it also so Cheeks and Mihai said that there has to be that balance of challenge. So it can't be too challenging that it puts them off, but it's also not got to be boring. And I think that in forest school, the children are able to find that level for themselves effortlessly. And we can teach them skills and scaffold to help them to get to where they need to go as well, quite easily through our observations of them. And I think it's the role really of forest school leaders to protect those conditions for flow to happen. We need to make sure that we are running the sessions for the appropriate length of time. I know that in some schools it can get quite squeezed. Really, ideally, you want at least 2 hours for flow to get going and to carry on going. Whereas sometimes it can be squeezed down to an hour, sometimes 45 minutes. That's not ideal because a child might get into those flow conditions, just get into it, and then you're having to rip them out of it again, which, you want them to stay in that zone for as long as possible. I think that's where traditional schooling doesn't allow children to get into that zone, that flow state, because quite often there's predetermined objectives and outcomes for the sessions that are being taught, and there's very structured timetables. So with time slots they've got to stick to. We've got to stop doing that now because it's time for assembly. We've got to go off down the corridor to another space. All of that. It just takes children either out of that zone or doesn't even allow them to get into the state of flow in the first place with their learning. So, like we said before, it's not the fault of teachers, it's just the system. If we were to allow them more time, if they'd really got into that flow state and we could see they were really in it, to be able to just leave them to get on in that state would be far more beneficial for them.
Yeah, with my take on a lot of it and the way the school system is developed is that it's the way the classrooms are structured, the way the lessons are structured, the way the day is structured is based, and the way that most of the tactics for teaching and the strategies and pedagogy is based around, to a greater or lesser extent, around crowd control. Because if you have 30 children creating individualized programs and learning for each one just isn't very practical within that
Mm,
space.
mm,
And the rigidity of the school days to make sure that 150 meals can be prepared for that time, and that there's playground staff available for the break time, and that the reason why we stand up and walk in straight lines is because if we all charge down the corridor, someone is going to get injured. So a lot of
mm.
kind of very administrative tasks that are part of the school day that aren't necessarily a thing within a smaller group setting. So
Yes.
how So I'm just kind of throwing it out there. How do you see that is it possible within a school system to be able to create though that individualized learning that you said flow requires?
Yeah. So I think if we actually got rid of subjects for a start and had a thematic approach instead. So we based everything on themes, and they were the themes that inspired by the children, really. So what are their interests? And that way you can actually still teach the subjects, but not you can sort of join them up together more easily. They don't have to be standalone individual subjects. They can be all interconnected. Um, and I just think that would be so much better for developing those neural connections in the brain, because you're actually linking things together and it all makes sense holistically. So that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, I mean that from what I've heard from teachers who were in the profession for longer, at least in the past, was that that was more of a way things used to be in some respects. Um, I I went through teacher training right around the changeover to I don't know whether there's been a new curriculum since the last big curriculum change somewhere around what is it, early 2010s, around
Yeah,
there, and that was getting a lot more prescriptive in some areas.
that's right. Yeah. Do you remember the literacy and numeracy hour that they brought in, where you had to stick strictly to an hour for each? I mean, imagine if a child had really got into their piece of writing and were really being creative with it, and you had to say, no, you have to stop now, it's the end of the hour. It just doesn't make sense, does it, for their
Yeah,
learning?
in some ways it's training those short attention spans because it's going,
Yeah,
okay, no, we're just going to constantly ask you to task shift from one
yeah,
thing to the next. And the as you said, whatever when the brain activates, it's activating a pathway, and the more you activate that pathway, which is task switching, the more you're going to get the same results.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think now is a really good time to be talking about this because they're actually reviewing the curriculum now. Yesterday, the white paper came out. It was mainly based around SEN provision, but there's lots of changes they're going to be making to the curriculum as a whole. So, yeah, it's exciting times.
Hopefully positive changes. I admit I don't keep track of it very much because my interaction with schools now is very minimal,
Mm,
and mostly going, no, I will not do curriculum stuff outdoors. That's not my skill set, and that's not where I see children thriving.
no, yeah, indeed. Yeah, we need to do more outdoor learning, definitely.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's a lot of pressures, and this is why, yes, I don't blame teachers in the slightest because of all the pressures to hit the different outcomes to do that. We kind of lose track of the tools that actually enable it.
Mm, yes, I agree.
So, with how do you see forest school within that school context? Because it's in many ways it's marketed as a kind of a break from school in some
Mm,
respects, or something that only the children that are really, really struggling get to do, or on the other side, the ones that are extremely well behaved. It's kind of within most school settings, that's the way it
mm.
operates. Not really the connection between the academic outcomes and forest school for good reason are separated, but there is an interlink, isn't there? Particularly when it comes
Yeah,
to flow.
yeah, and I think we have a challenge in that the way assessment is in schools, it's all numerical. It's done via SATs and things like that. And I think um, when it comes to forest school, trying to prove the benefits and to see it tangibly is a challenge, really. But I do think that it's possible, and I think that by using a more ipsative method of assessment, so I suppose more anecdotal, starting off with a anecdote of how you've seen them at the beginning and how that's progressed towards the end. Um, and the development you've seen during that time, I think that can really, you know, help. But we're just not used to assessing in that way very much. I really do think we need to take that approach. Yeah, I think that would be more beneficial for children. Mm.
Yeah, it's one of the thoughts that's kind of going around the forest school space a little bit more now is how we quantify the value because
Mm.
I said it's budgets are stretched, there's time is stretched, pressures everywhere, and a lot of leaders are needing to justify their time. But I don't think we're as used to being part of research and the kind of more tangible outcomes for our school
Mm.
because a lot of it, as you say, is observation based, and it's sometimes difficult to see what is going on in a child's head
It is.
when they're not directly putting something on paper.
And I think there's a lot of the emotional side and the emotional development that children you see with children. I had an encounter quite recently actually where a child was really struggling at the end of the session. They'd always, go away crying. So the first couple of sessions, they'd end the session crying, and I thought, my goodness, what's going on here? And so I observed really carefully on the part on the at the end of the session. We usually do a tidy up game, and what I realized was that he was trying really hard, and he just wanted that recognition at the end. So I gave him that recognition, and it made all the difference. He went away smiling to the point where at the end of the series of sessions, he he actually was able to recognize an achievement from somebody else in the session, another child. So I made sure I leapt on that as well. I said, "Oh, well done! That's amazing that you were able to recognise an achievement of somebody else as well." And it was just fantastic to see him going from just not coping emotionally at all to actually being able to support somebody else with that. It was incredible, and that was just over the course of 6 weeks. So I don't think you could really necessarily achieve that so easily in a classroom environment.
Yes, and that's one of the core problems, and that's something that we've known for a long time in a theoretical sense, is that you kind of need though that social and emotional and all of your base needs met. I mean, it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need to feel safe and secure and everything else before you can actually get to the point where you are to get a higher level. And does that also include getting to the flow state? Can you get into a flow state if you're hungry, tired, or not feeling part of a group?
I
Seems like
think
a requisite.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I think you're right. I think you do need to have those basic needs met in order to get into that state. And actually, the outdoor environment in itself supports that because it actually helps in a particular woodland environment to put your brain into a calm state, which is much better for learning. Because there are children who are constantly on that fight or flight edge, maybe because of their home environment. It could be past trauma, that kind of thing. Um, and so being in an environment that naturally calms your brain because of listening to bird song or smelling pine needles, that kind of thing, then you're already halfway there. You're already in that state, which is fantastic. And also just being active, being out and being active, that increases the blood flow to the brain. So that can have a positive effect on learning too. Um, so you've also got all of those sensory feedbacks. So in the classroom, you have to manufacture that to some extent. So we would provide children with things like wobble cushions or sensory toys or safe spaces to go to if they feel dysregulated. They might have a sensory tent to go to. You don't need to provide that in forest school because it's there for you. They can go and find a quiet space, or they can make a den to go and hide in themselves. They can just take themselves off. And you get the children who will just rub themselves with mud on their face because they love that sensory feedback. They need that. So yeah, it's all just there naturally with no effort and no expense as well. With budgets being squeezed, that's quite a big thing.
Yeah, the thing that I see quite often, particularly when I'm doing more of my therapy, because I do a lot of therapeutic work now with teens in secondary school, and these are the ones at risk of exclusion. These are the ones that are really struggling. It's square peg in a round hole. They're not coping with the indoors. Just simply being outside of the classroom, outside of a formal lesson, is enough for them to kind of set aside a lot of the problems and the worries that they have, and the kind of emotional triggers, because it's a different space, it's measured differently. And what I see quite often developing in a lot of children, that's frequent problem, is this kind of fear of failure. So they don't get into anything in any depth because they're worried about not being able to do it right. And
Mm,
being in a context outside where they know they're not being tested, it's not going to affect their SATs or their GCSEs or anything else, that
mm,
they can just succeed or fail at something on its own merit without a big audience.
mm.
That's a measure of safety as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a difference to being told, oh, you haven't got this quite right, to actually discovering that for yourself and not having to be told. I know that, and that creates that safety, doesn't it? Where you can make mistakes and there's no pressure. There's not somebody externally telling you you've got that wrong. That kind of adds an extra pressure on. If you can just work that out for yourself, you can just work around it more easily. And schools did bring in the growth mindset sort of incentive a while ago, and there was a big push on this to try to get children to take more risks with their learning, and to not be afraid of making mistakes. But it's all very well sort of having lessons on that. And like I say, it's a very different thing finding that out for yourself to being told it all the time.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a bad mistake, but no, you failed this test.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very different,
It's
isn't it?
one hand is not quite say what the other is. So if we're working with children outside, um, we've covered I think a few of the core conditions of flow, but
Mm.
what what would you say are the things that we should be looking out for and thinking when we're planning a session? Because as you say, a lot of it is we're hoping that the children will just find something that just connects with their brain and then they go deep in it. But how can we help create those conditions?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think it's all about planning responsively to the children as the lesson goes on. So it's about planning in the moment, really. That's something that doesn't happen much in the classroom. I know that lower down in the early years, reception classes, they tend to have continuous provision available. So lots of different activities that they can go to and choose. So they have more autonomy. And so a little bit of planning in the moment happens there. But it's easy to do that in forest school because it gives you that opportunity and the learning's more fluid and organic. So it's about observing, seeing what's emerging, and then scaffolding it so that the children are able to build on on their learning. And really, ideally, you just want to try and pick up on their passions and their interests. And I think because you have fewer children generally in forest school, they do say, don't they, that a maximum of 15 children is best. you do have that opportunity to get to know them well, and it should be run over a long period of time as well. So you have that opportunity to get to know them. Um,
And
yeah.
how would you, so you mentioned scaffolding there, and
Mm.
this is a nuanced area with the role of a leader because I don't think there's straightforward uh, answers either way on this, but it is possible to um, disrupt flow within by kind of drawing attention to it. Because sometimes a child can be engaged in something and can really be looking deeply at it. And then at the same time, a little moment or two later, if you step in and ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing, you draw attention to it, and suddenly it's they're snapped out of their own interest and they're starting to think, am I being judged about this? Is this something that is affecting me?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a skill, isn't there, in watching and observing, and knowing when the right moment is to step in. Um, and yeah, quite sometimes it might be that you want them to. So let's take fire lighting as an example. You might decide that that first lesson that you introduce that with a group of children, you want them to experience that struggle to build that resilience. And so it might not be until the next session that you start to put in some scaffolding for children who may need it to help them to achieve what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, it's a very fine balance, and it's all about building those relationships with the children and knowing the children really well, and having that confidence to just stand back and observe and not worry about doing that.
I mean, that's the core struggle for as far as school leader is am I actually doing anything by stepping back? Particularly if you, I feel, particularly if you come from a teaching background where we're always used to actually pushing learning forward and drawing things out and like the notice they're interested in something. Oh, how many sticks can you count there? Like, no, no, just let them focus on the sticks. That's fine. It's hard to untrain that side of you, as I said, particularly from a teaching background, but all the way over as an adult, we're used to kind of giving information and kind of just being wanting to jump in and go, oh, I can show you how to get there faster, but that's not really helping the process, is it?
Yeah, no, you're right as well. And yeah, it's about not foisting our ideas onto them as well, because they come up with incredible ideas that you won't have even thought of sometimes. So if you just take a stick, for example, it could become all sorts of things in a child's play, and sometimes they come up with things that you haven't thought of at all, just using their imagination. Sometimes you can inspire them by saying, we're going to make wands today, and do a bit of whistling to turn that stick into a wand. um, uh, but then they will come up with something completely different that you just couldn't have thought of by yourself. And I think you don't want to do, you can put in little bits to inspire them, but you don't want to do too much, and you certainly don't want to enforce that, because it will stop them from creating their own ideas.
Yeah, creating little kind of nudges. It's one of the things I do for some of my sessions. I call them play prompts, where I'll just take a tarp, I'll tie a string to one corner, I'll tie it to a tree. Just leave it at that. Just so that
Yeah,
it's out there. It's not in the box. So it's not kind of held within the, okay, I've got to start something from scratch. But it's just enough for them to look at it and go, I'm not sure what that is. It's not
yeah,
immediately like if you put up a pop-up tent, then it's immediately a tent.
yeah,
Whereas if you have something that's a bit more open-ended, there's
yeah,
that opportunity to just take it in any sort of direction.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the brilliant thing about all of the things, all of the resources available in forest school, isn't it? That they're open-ended. You can do whatever you choose to do with them. I know my daughter, the first time I took her to a forest school session, she didn't use the tarp to make a shelter. She actually made um, a a hammock with one. I hadn't seen a child actually think to do that before. So yeah, that really took me back. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Well done. So yeah, yeah,
No, then that's a fantastic application and use of plasticity is going, okay, well, what is a top? What is a hammock? It's essentially a sheet of fabricy stuff that's held up by string on each end. Well, wonder if this could work. And yeah, it's the open-ended in that, yeah, I think we do get wrapped up in resources for a certain use sometimes and not as much with, okay, it can be anything. And yeah, I'd say yes, keeping things as open-ended as possible really does help move the
mm,
thinking forward. And it's that kind of critical thinking and problem solving and out of the box thinking that we're really hoping to develop. Not sure it helps
absolutely.
very much when you need to know things by rote to pass a test, but it's looking at things in different ways, and that's definitely something as a
Yeah,
society that's valuable.
yeah. I mean, you're right in that in traditional schooling, there's quite a lot of memorizing facts and information. But I think with forest school, they're able to generate that information for themselves almost. Um, so it's more of an active learning process. And I think in traditional schooling, there's quite a lot of passive learning that happens. They're expected to sit and listen for periods of time. There's quite copying from the board or repeating things. I remember my grandma saying, "Oh, they don't teach times tables properly these days. We used to have to go into the Eldon Anderson shelter with and put our hands on our heads and backs off the wall and chant out our times tables. They don't do that anymore," she was saying, and she sort of said that implying that that was better learning, but I don't think it was because yes, she might have learnt her times tables really well that way, but I expect there was other children who were clearly left behind from that style of learning. Um, and yeah, I think it's good to be introduce that active learning style to include everybody. It's far more inclusive.
Yeah, and movement is a universal language. Play is a
Mm.
universal language.
Yeah.
And I think that really just highlights the need for as you say, more individualized learning approach because not
Mm.
all of us learn exactly the same way. There are some core processes that we're all good at, but some people learn better through just repeating something 100 times. Others through actively engaging with it, actually having physical representations of, say, the times tables. Um, there's myriad of different ways to work it, and I think it becomes much more possible within the small scale approach of a really nice forest school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing with flow. If you're in the flow state, you need far fewer repetitions to be able to learn something and for it to stick than if you are passively learning in the classroom and sitting and listening. You need far more repetitions of that. And that's been scientifically proven. I can't remember where I've read that, but definitely have come across that before. So yeah, I think there's definitely something about up and being active that benefits us all, whether we are more passive learners or not.
On the subject of working for all of us, where do you stand with play and adults and the practitioners? Do we make enough use of flow in as either leaders or just in general adults?
So do you mean as adults, do we have enough flow in our lives or
Yeah, and is there still value if we're not
absolutely. I
strictly
think
within academic learning?
yeah, and of course, that's different for all of us. I think we probably enter flow through our hobbies quite often, and I found myself entering a state of flow more recently through writing. That's where I found it. I have at times, when I was a teacher, if I was planning a really exciting set of lessons, I'd find myself in a state of flow. Time would go and I'd still be there. I quite like to do really detailed plans. That was just my style. So yeah, I'd get into a state of flow then. And I know that for some people that might be painting or cooking. My cousin's wife, she definitely finds her flow through cleaning. She does loves to clean. Her house is absolutely immaculate. It puts mine to shame, but that's just where she finds her flow. Um, so yeah, I wonder where do you think you get into your flow state, Bracken?
That's I feel like I don't get into the flow as much as I used to.
Ah,
There was I think there was a period of time, particularly when I was studying at university, where a flow state was something that I achieved quite often, usually when I was working my way through assignments, because to be honest, I even though it kind of got old a little bit further down the line, I did actually enjoy writing a lot of my assignments and researching them. And I'd be there for 3, 4 hours on the go, and then I'd look up and go, wait a second, you haven't eaten or drunk anything, you just plowed through it and got a whole lot done. Since then, I think because there's so many distractions in life, there's so many things that pull you in different directions, particularly with the advent of social media, notifications, and all of that. That's made things a lot more difficult to find spaces of uninterrupted time to enter
mm,
flow. Even on my workday, I'm just switching tasks too often to really reach a good flow state.
mm. That's a really good point, actually. And I wonder if children find that in their home lives with a lot of technology around now. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
So obviously the times I get flow most often now is when I actually have time on my own out in the woods and I'm doing something purposeful. It's difficult to find flow if there isn't a purpose, an end result for me. There's got to be something concrete at the end of it. But then when I'm focused on something that takes longer, something that takes more um, embodiment, more kind of focus on my hands and the movements, then it all kind of just flows together a lot better.
Interesting. Yeah, lovely. So maybe you're an active learner. Have to be doing.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That I do enjoy reading. Maybe maybe I do get into books quite a bit. Maybe that's another flow state that I hadn't really thought
Yeah,
of how I
yeah.
can just end up finishing a whole book in one day where it's just going.
That certainly sounds like flow to me. Fantastic.
But it is hard to set aside those times, and I think children do experience that struggle because it's just like pulled onto the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Mm.
But it's valuable because I've managed some of my best work when I'm in that kind of flow, just once I've set aside the time and I've created the space and just focused, the quality has been so much greater and it feels good
Mm.
coming out of the back of that.
And I think the thing for children is that they can see that for themselves. They don't have to be told that. They don't have to be rewarded with stickers or certificates to be told that they can see it for themselves. And you can see their pride when they take home their earth candle that they've made, or it's just lovely. It's lovely to see.
So how does this, I know we've kind of touched on it briefly, but I mentioned this might be something that worth talking about, um is looking at flow state in regards to children that experience a lot of stress and trauma. Would you
Mm.
be able to talk a bit more on where flow impacts that?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, it's having that outdoor environment and being um, in that calm place, with where their brain is nice and calm and open to learning. That's really beneficial, but it also allows them to get into that flow state. Whereas in the classroom, there's quite a lot of distractions. I know that over time they've sort of changed how they have displays in classrooms. I know when I first started teaching, it was the bigger and brighter the better. But now it's been recognised that that can be really overwhelming for children like that, and so
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. So they've gone for more natural tones, and you quite often see Hessian backing, and earthy colours, um, you know, rather than bright neon pink or whatever, that you used to see. So that all helps for children to get into that right space in their brain and to enter the flow state. And I think, being outdoors in forest school and being able to have that autonomy to choose, particularly for children with PDA profiles, so pathological demand avoidance, um, that pressure is completely taken away from the classroom expectations, where they can be inspired by an activity that you've maybe shared with the group, but they don't have to take part in that. They can go and do what they choose to do, but they have that choice. And I think it just takes the pressure off for them, allows them to breathe, and therefore allows them to get into that state of flow without having to worry and without that anxiety building.
I think the really valuable word there is choice. And
Mm,
that's something that, as as we were talking about earlier, it's one of those things that's difficult to create within an environment where there's lots of children, that they all have a choice whether to
mm,
engage with something. But all children can and do choose whether they want to learn or not. And learning
mm,
is something that can't be forced. I fundamentally believe that if someone doesn't want to learn, they're not going to.
mm,
And I think we run away a little bit from the idea of giving children choice and agency over their own learning, because we're not we're maybe not sure whether they will choose to learn if they're given the choice. But saying that getting the children in the outdoor environment, I can say they fundamentally do choose to learn. There's a natural curiosity to children until we kind of get rid of it.
I think you're right. I think there is that panic of, well, if we don't force children to read and write, they'll never read and write. Um, I don't think that's necessarily true, because they will at some point come across something that will require them, that they're interested in, that will require them to have those skills. And when they want to do that for themselves, they'll be more receptive and more open to doing that. And therefore, they will go ahead and do that. So yeah, it's just about timing, really, isn't it? I think we work very linearly, and we expect children to progress at a rate that we've determined, really, and that's not realistic. That's not organic, and children will develop at different paces at different times.
Yeah, I think rather if we charted most learning on a graph, there wouldn't be a flat line. It would look more like a mountain range in the Himalayas. It's very much up and down, and this is something that I've seen both within school system where it's kind of um it's not it's not understood as much, not
Mm.
supported. I've had parents with children who've basically been told by teachers that children shouldn't learn to read before they go to school because they'd be too far ahead and that they'd jump ahead and they'd pull the whole class off. At the same
Wow.
time, seeing my siblings who were home educated for much of their lives, they they went through a number of years before they learned to read, and they went from not reading at all to novels within the space of a year
Wow.
because they were at the correct time for them developmentally. Each of them had a different time when they reached that. Some were later, some were earlier, where it was just went from 0 to 100 in one go,
Mm.
and that was just because they suddenly decided, no, I want, as you say, they found something that interested them,
Mm.
and then they ran with it. And then we were just able to, because they were home educated, they were able to be supported with that. They had all of the resources and they're able to keep jumping ahead and keep moving forward and keep the momentum.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you're right because in other things we do recognise that to some extent. So if we take potty training, for example, we know that if we start too early, it can take a lot longer than if we wait until the child's ready. That must be the same for any learning, really. And yet we don't allow for that in schools.
Yeah, I mean, even if we, one of the things that I'm talking a lot more recently and I'm having a lot of conversations with people about, and this is something that even if we just go, okay, recognize we can't individualize every single track for every single children within a class of 30 with our current structure and system. But even just looking at children when they start in reception and separating boys and girls who developmentally are on completely different timescales for
Mm.
early development, even within those large subgroups, is a massive difference.
Yes, yeah, you're right. And from year group to year group, they progress differently as well. So I mentioned how I used to teach across the primary range, and I found that in year two, particularly, there was generally a lot of natural progress those children would make that just made them zoom, from A to B, throughout the year. And then in year three, what I tended to find was that they would plateau quite a lot. They'd just get to that point where they'd had a big, it's like having a growth spurt, isn't it? But it's the same with their learning. Had a big growth spurt in year two, and then it sort of flatlined a little bit. But of course, the way that assessment worked was that they still had to show that they'd made the same amount of progress, whether they were in year two or year three. It was the same number of points they had to make, which seems a bit silly, really, when naturally, generally, that's what I could see happening. So yeah, it was a tough being a year three teacher.
Yeah, yeah, it's when it's standardized and averaged out that makes
Mm.
things a little tricky because yeah, it doesn't come in a linear fashion in any way, shape, or form. I mean, my own learning at this point doesn't come in one go. There's periods where I'm kind of just keep on rolling, and then suddenly something will hit, and there will be I'll come across a fantastic podcast guest, or I'll read a interesting book, and then suddenly my understanding of something will leap forward. And then suddenly there'll be a snowball effect of change and things happening, and then there'll be a period of consolidation where it's just okay. I've learned all this stuff. Now I just need to integrate it, and I need to practice using it. I need to become comfortable with it. I want to be confident and competent.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot. Yes, you're right. Yeah. I don't think we allow enough time for that, do we? We sort of need year groups in between where they can just implement what they've learned and without expected progress being made. Yeah, absolutely. That would work well.
Yeah, I mean, my plan had ever since I left the school system, my plan for Solve It All was somewhere along the lines of halve the amount of lesson time, double the number of teachers, and go from there. Because yeah, you need that time to consolidate and need for teachers as well as students. It's like both sides need time to relax a bit more and play a bit more. I mean, the teens that I get out, they just need to spend half an hour in a hammock to decompress just from a one session on a Monday morning because we have them the second period and they're read after on a Monday, so they haven't had the rest of the school week and they're already needing time to decompress after that.
Yeah, yeah, they just need that regulation time, don't they? Yeah, absolutely. I do at times, we all do, don't we? Need that time
Yeah, and
to
this is something that I see within because I have that perspective where I've kind of straddled both sides of the home ed and school system divide, where I have people who I know people with their children still in within the school system, and then I work with a lot of home-made families. And I did primary school and trained as a teacher. Um, but at the same time, all my siblings were home educators, so I kind of see both sides of it, both sides of that coin. And what I see with a lot of home-ed families that come from, they take the children out of the school system, and then the children are accomplishing the same amount that they
mm,
would within a week in 5 hours on one
mm,
day because the quality is greater there because they can just focus, they can get support on that one thing, and that accelerates them forward. They can get into a flow with that because they've
yeah,
got the support there.
yeah,
And so that's why I think we just need is more teachers, more individualized learning, and I think that will help everyone.
yeah. You're so right.
I mean,
There's so many stories where teachers, express their frustration at starting a session and then um 10, 15 minutes into the session of people putting their hand up and saying they haven't got a pencil. And all that time has been wasted because that people hasn't got what they needed to start. And I think you're right, having that greater ratio of um, adult to student. If we, because in forest school we go to 1 to 8, don't we? So, and I think that works really well. Um, but obviously it costs money in schools to do that all the time, and that I don't think that money is out there at the moment. So yeah,
I'm do you mind if I throw you a curveball out of left field here?
yeah, go.
So, how do you feel about AI with individualized learning? Because this is something that a lot of people are now talking about. And this was I saw the idea of this first in a video essay about it's got to be about 8, 9 years ago now,
Mm.
where it's talking about Aristotle, and I think it was Aristotle, and he was the tutor to, I think it was a tutor to Alexander the Great. And he's saying like he was the tutor, he was that individualized person that helped the Alexander become the Great and conquer most of the civilized world. Uh, that if and basically in the video it said eventually in the future there will just be this robot that is your child's personal tutor that
Oh.
just completely individualizes the learning, helps them with exactly the problem they're trying to solve, knows 100 different ways to approach the problem, and knows which one is going to work best, whether it's
Mm.
putting in football analogies or making it linked to ancient Rome or whatever. What
Well,
are your thoughts?
I'm not completely against AI, but I do think we have to be careful because there's a lot of misinformation going around, and we want to be able to teach children to spot spot that and to be able to think for themselves and to think critically. So I think that still needs a human to be able to do that. I don't think AI can do that for you. I think it can be a useful tool. I think it can help when you're to generate ideas. It can help when you're trying to brainstorm ideas and come up with things, because it sometimes makes you think of things that you haven't thought of before. Um, and so yeah, it can take you down different avenues that and open up new avenues. But like I say, I think you have to be careful with it because it's not foolproof. And there are things that will come up that are not helpful. And yeah, I just think it needs to be used carefully. I'm not completely against it. I think it could be useful.
Yeah, I think that mirrors very much my own stance on that. It's a tool, and it's one that's probably going to be necessary to learn how to use for basically everyone who's currently below the age of 40. It's because yeah, there's people here who are in just a couple of years of retirement. They're not going to have to deal with AI very much. They're probably
Mm.
in upper level positions that aren't going to be replaced, and they can continue on with life as normal. But for everyone else, it's going to be a tool that I think is going to get more widespread use. And I think there is there is a good argument for it as a tool, but as you say, there's got to be the yin and yang balance. Then that one of the social media posts I follows from a school in America, they say that the future of education, they come out with some interesting ideas. They say that they do 2 hours a day where the children are basically taught core subjects by an AI tutor. So maths, science, English, so on. So it's
Mm.
all 100% personalized to that child. They're moving at their own rate of
Mm.
progress, and that's great. So they have that allotted, and then they spend the rest of the day, the rest of the week on social, emotional, mental health, on learning practical skills, cooking, um,
Mm.
crafting, car repair, whatever, doing community outreach programs, learning how to run a business, spending time, and within all of this, they still have teachers, but the teachers are brought in a primarily pastoral role. They're there as a kind of guide to help them navigate life rather than the authority on all of the learning. And I think there's interesting ideas, and I think some permutation of that model might be the answer.
Yeah, I could see that working. That's a very different role though, isn't it, to what how it works now.
But
Yeah.
wouldn't it be a role that you would rather be in, that you would looking after the well-being of the children you're with, rather
I
than just strictly on
yeah. Well, I think we've also got to be careful of the social aspect as well, where children work together to solve problems because they can learn from each other. And I think if it's completely individualized, you might lose some of that. And I think we need to try and encourage that as much as possible. And actually, when I think about it, how teaching is currently doesn't allow for that, many opportunities for that. I think we need to make sure that the the actual learning tasks change as well, and that they're more investigatory and more experiments involved, so that they're trying things out and learning from it that way, getting things wrong and working together to solve problems.
it's massively important to have things occasionally where you go, okay, I'm just giving it to you. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. What
Mm.
are you going to come up with?
Mm, yeah.
All right, I think we've been going for close to an hour, so I think we may want to start winding it down there. I think we could
Yeah.
probably talk about the future of the school system for another 2, 3 hours easily.
We
So I
could
just
indeed.
want to give you, first of all, opportunity to talk about your book. We've kind of hinted at it. And,
Yeah.
who's it for, and what does it cover?
Well, it's for anybody who's interested, really, but I suppose mainly primary teachers and anyone interested in primary schooling, anyone involved in forest school too. Um, so it's called Teaching for Flow, Transforming Primary Education for Optimal Learning. And you can find it on the Routledge website, or it's also on Amazon. But there is currently a 20% discount on the Routledge website if you use the code 26SMA1. So that's active until June. Um, and yeah, really, it's just about getting that message out there because I'm so passionate about this. And I feel that although it's not necessarily a definitive answer, I'm hoping to spark a start of a change that, well, a revolution really in education and changing the curriculum to suit our children.
Yeah, it's absolutely needed. So what's next? What's next on your
Well, wherever the journey takes me, we'll see what's next. Yeah, yeah, my main aim at the moment is just to get the message out there as much as possible.
fantastic? Before we go, do you have any advice for the new forest school or outdoor leader, someone who's just coming into the role? What would you say is your top bit of advice for that new leader?
Firstly, I'd say great choice, good decision, and just to remember to sit back and observe and not interfere too often.
Yeah, that's just as
Yeah,
valuable as
yeah,
being an active part.
absolutely. It doesn't mean you're not doing your job. You are doing your job by doing that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Bracken. That's great.
We talk again soon.
Thank you.